He stole 5 grand from me and thought he'd get away with it. But I only needed £8.50 to tear his entire life apart. It's funny what you remember. Not the big fights or the grand betrayals, that stuff tends to blur. No, what I remember most clearly is standing in the corner shop at 2:14 in the morning, staring at a bag of salt and vinegar crisps, so sleep-deprived my body felt like it was vibrating. I had just pulled a double shift at the pub and had class at 9. And he was home, probably on his 5th hour of Xbox, laughing with people online, drinking my last can of cider. I wish I could say I knew it then, that some part of me recognized that moment as the tipping point, but I didn't. Back then, I was still doing what so many people do when they're in too deep. Making excuses. Telling myself he was just going through something. That he'd find his footing again. That the guy I met, the driven one, the funny one, the one who surprised me with flowers from the Tesco clearance bin just because, would come back. But that guy had disappeared. I met him during my first year at uni. I'd been late starting, deferred my studies to travel a bit and save money, so I was 22, slightly older than most of the freshers. He was 26. Confident. Focused. He was doing a business degree, working part-time at some tech shop, and seemed to have this boundless energy that pulled people toward him. The kind of guy who seemed to get life. And he got me too. At least at first. We fell into each other fast. Moved in together before the end of the first term, even though neither of us could really afford it. We made it work, sort of. I picked up bar shifts and cleaned airms. He kept up with his classes, worked weekends, and was always planning something bigger. That's what hooked me, the plans. He'd talk about setting up his own company, starting a podcast, flipping niche gadgets online. Every day a new obsession. I'd lie there in bed, listening to him rant about passive income and digital markets and think, he's going to be someone. We're going to build something. I believed it. Until slowly the cracks widened. First it was small things. He missed a lecture or two. Stopped bothering with laundry. Brushed off responsibilities with that cheeky grin that made me laugh in the early days. Then it got worse. He started ghosting entire weeks of classes. Got fired from his part-time job for no-shows. I found empty takeaway boxes stacked behind the sofa, crusted over mugs with God knows what growing in them, socks that had become semi-permanent residents of the hallway. He never lifted a finger. I didn't leave. I picked up the slack. Bar shift after bar shift, study group after study group, I convinced myself this was a phase. That stress was eating him alive. That when things calmed down, the man I loved would snap back into shape. He didn't. Then came the worst night. The night I came home early after a shift swap and found him. Her. The look on his face, blank, not even shocked. Like he didn't care I caught them. Like I was just interrupting something mildly annoying. I didn't scream. I didn't throw things. I just told him to leave. Told him I was done. I barely remember what I said, but I remember how quiet my voice was. Like I'd used up all my rage in the months leading up to that night. The next morning I was on autopilot. Shower. Toast. Class. It wasn't until I sat down in the library that it hit me. The savings account. We'd opened it when we first moved in together. A joint account. Mostly my money. I'd been stacking tips inside Hustle Cash. Every spare pound I could manage. We said it was for rent emergencies or maybe a short trip when term ended. I hadn't thought about it in weeks. My stomach turned cold. I logged in. Balance £0. I froze. Stared. Refreshed. Refreshed again. Every last penny gone. 5,000 and change. My hands were shaking. I kept whispering no. 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 Under my breath like that would undo it. The library around me blurred. He'd stolen it. Packed up his things, left my life and cleared the account. I rang the bank. There was nothing they could do. His name was on it. He had full access. The police? Same answer. You can try civil court, they said, but even the officer on the phone sounded like he was just reading a script, knowing it wasn't worth it. And that was the moment something inside me broke. Not a dramatic snap, just a slow creeping crack. Like a hairline fracture in your rib, you don't notice until breathing hurts. He took everything I had and the world just shrugged. I went home and cried until my throat was raw. And then something else happened. Not clarity, not even calm. Just a different kind of energy. Focused. Cold. I remembered something. A job I had one summer. Debt collection. Grim work, but it paid well. I'd been trained, seen the inner workings, watched how people got chewed up by the system, and how others exploited it. And I remembered something very specific. Debt in the UK becomes statute barred after 6 years. Meaning, if a creditor hasn't successfully chased you for it in that time, they lose legal enforcement rights. And here's the key, if any payment is made before that 6-year limit, even £1, the clock resets. Guess who used to brag about dodging his debts? Guess who used to gloat about winning the system? Guess who was just a few months away from hitting that magical 6-year mark? And guess who had all the documentation for every single debt he owed? Me. I still had it all. I had been the one managing his post, sorting his correspondence, reminding him when his name came up in red ink. Because back then I thought I was helping, building a future, being a supportive partner. What I had really been was a fool with access to everything he thought he'd buried. So I made a plan. First, I gathered the letters carefully, quietly, sat cross-legged on the floor of our shared storage box, flipping through the yellowing envelopes like ancient artifacts. I took notes, names, reference numbers, outstanding amounts. I organized them like I was prepping for a final exam. Then I picked up the phone. I didn't lie. That was important. I told each creditor I was a friend, calling to make a payment on his behalf. I didn't impersonate him, that would have been illegal. But I offered to pay something small. Anything. They couldn't give me details, but they could take money. And they did. £1 here. £1.50 there. One had a minimum of £2, annoyingly. It added up to £8.50. I hung up and stared at the receipt printouts, heart pounding. That was it. The trap was laid. I'd restarted the countdown on every one of his long-forgotten debts. Quiet little ticking bomb. But I wasn't done. I gave each company the most recent address I had for him. His new flat, where he'd moved in with his side piece. And for good measure, I gave them his parents' house too. I knew they wouldn't just change the address on my say-so. That's not how it worked. But I also knew they'd flag it. Run his name through tracing software. And if anything matched up, a utilities bill, a voter registration, they'd latch on like a leech. And then, I waited. It was surreal, watching it all unfold from a distance. I still followed one of the forums he used to haunt, out of habit, or maybe morbid curiosity. I watched his updates shift from smug brags about his new TV and gaming setup to nervous questions about court letters and urgent legal stuff showing up in the mail. Then came the post that made my breath catch. Anyone ever dealt with a county court summons? Do I have to go? Can they really do anything if I don't show? I stared at the screen, barely blinking. That slow creeping fracture inside me widened just a little more. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. He had enough mates giving him awful advice. One told him not to show up, that it was a bluff. That missing court couldn't really hurt him. And just like that, I knew how this would end. He skipped the court date. Of course he did. A few weeks later, I logged onto the forum, almost trembling. His latest post was a photo. An empty flat. No TV. No PC. No console. Just wires and dust outlines on the carpet. Underneath, he wrote, "Bailiffs came. Took everything." I stared at the screen for a long time. Didn't smile. Didn't laugh. Just sat there in the silence, letting it settle over me. And I whispered, "Hope it was worth it." The next time he tried to call me, I didn't even hesitate. I sent him straight to voicemail. Then he tried again. 4 times in one day. By the 5th, I blocked his number. I didn't need to hear his voice, that strange cocktail of fake sincerity and practiced helplessness. I knew exactly what he wanted. For me to help fix the mess he was in. Because that's what I used to do. Back when I still thought love meant rescuing someone who didn't want to be saved. He didn't stop there. A message popped up on Facebook. An account he hadn't used in ages. All it said was, "Please, I'm screwed. Can we just talk?" I stared at it for a full minute, then deleted it. He didn't deserve a conversation, and I didn't need closure. But that didn't stop me from watching the fallout. In a way, it became my quiet obsession. Like watching a landslide you started by flicking a single stone. You don't look away. You can't. Another few weeks passed. His forum updates grew more erratic. He stopped bragging about new purchases and started asking technical questions about freezing accounts, CCJs, and getting blacklisted. You could see it, this growing panic bleeding through his carefully casual language. He tried to keep the bravado, but it was cracking at the edges. One night about 3 a.m. he posted a photo that made me sit bolt upright. It was a screenshot of a bank rejection, a closed account. Another bank had flagged him as high risk. He'd been trying to open a new account, presumably to stash whatever little money he had left, and was rejected due to multiple active CCJs and adverse credit history. I felt a chill run through me. Not joy, not vengeance, just that weird kind of detached satisfaction. Like I'd restored a sense of balance. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't slashed his tires or sent nasty messages to his family. I'd simply rewound the clock. And now his time was up. The real twist, though, was what came next. His side chick, Emma, I think her name was, posted a vague but unmistakable status on her socials. Some people are just parasites. Lesson learned. I don't even know why I was still checking her page. Maybe I was still trying to understand what had drawn her to him in the first place. Or maybe I just wanted to watch the fallout unfold like a slow-motion car crash. Either way, she was gone. Moved out. Deleted their couple pics. Updated her status to single, and unfollowed his mum. It was poetic. Almost too perfect. I didn't celebrate. I didn't call a friend to laugh about it. I just lay on my sofa, an old blanket wrapped around my legs, the light from my laptop washing the room in that pale blue-gray glow. And I breathed. For the first time in months I felt like I could. But it didn't last. See, what no one tells you about revenge is that even when it works, even when it lands exactly the way you want it, it doesn't clean the wound. It just stops the bleeding. The damage underneath still needs dealing with. And I hadn't. My flat still felt like a graveyard. I could point out the exact spot where I'd found them tangled together. I could still smell his shampoo in the towels. His hair, dark, curled slightly at the ends, still showed up in the corners of the bathroom like echoes. I started avoiding home. Stayed longer at the bar after shifts. Hung out at the uni library even when I didn't need to. There was this quiet in my flat that didn't feel peaceful. Felt hollow. And sometimes when I closed the door behind me at night, I'd hear the silence push in like water. I didn't want him back. God no. But I hadn't expected this kind of emptiness either. Like I'd extracted a rotted tooth, but couldn't stop poking at the hole it left behind. One night around 1 a.m., I went out for a walk. Couldn't sleep. Couldn't sit still. I walked through the streets of my uni town, past the chicken shops and the shuttered-off pubs, my breath ghosting out in the early winter air. I ended up outside the flat we used to share. I don't know why I went. I didn't even realize I was headed there until I looked up and saw the building, dark except for one flickering stairwell bulb. Our old window was black. Curtains drawn. I stood across the street and stared. For a long time. No part of me wanted to go in. But I couldn't stop the memories. Him balancing a pizza box on one hand and his laptop on the other. Me in the corner trying to study while he interrupted me every 10 minutes to ask if I'd seen the latest clip from some now-defunct website. The night we stayed up until 4 making a blanket fort because the boiler had died again and we had no heating. It hadn't all been bad. That's what made it worse. It's easier to hate someone who was always cruel. But when they start off kind, generous, even brilliant, when you've seen the best of them, it's like grieving a ghost. I didn't stay long. Just long enough to feel that familiar tightness in my throat. Then I turned and walked away. I didn't tell anyone where I'd gone. At uni I kept my head down. Pushed through my modules. Worked, studied, slept, repeated. I didn't have the emotional bandwidth to explain things to friends who'd warned me about him. Didn't want to hear "told you so," even from the kind ones. And then a message came through. Not from him. From his sister. I hadn't expected that. We'd spoken a few times years back. She'd always seemed nice, though wary. Protective. She'd once told me, in a quiet, sideways kind of way, that he had patterns. I hadn't listened. Her message was short. Hey, I don't want to get involved, but I think you should know, he's blaming you for everything. He's telling people you stole from him, that you tanked his credit. Just wanted you to be aware. I stared at the screen. Something inside me curled, a slow burn rising behind my ribs. Not surprise. Not really. I knew what he was. But to hear he was out there spinning the story, painting himself as the victim, erasing the $5,000 he stole like it had never existed, that was something else. I replied, thanks. I figured he would. I've got receipts. She never wrote back. I didn't expect her to, but it stuck with me. I started thinking about the stories we tell other people, how we curate them. He was out there crafting his version of what happened, smoothing over the sharp edges of his actions, casting himself as the wronged one. And it made me wonder how many people I knew had done the same. How many people I trusted had once told a version of the truth that made them look better, sound cleaner. That thought lodged deep and I couldn't shake it. I started pulling away from people. Not out of fear exactly. Just exhaustion. Distrust. I began keeping things close to the chest. Even things that didn't matter. I kept going. Finished my term. Took every shift I could get. And when term ended I moved. Found a new flat in a quieter part of town. Different bus route. Different corner shop. I didn't tell him where I'd gone. I never heard from him again. But sometimes in the middle of a rainy Tuesday, or in the quiet space between two songs on a playlist, I'll remember the exact sound of him closing our front door that final time. Soft. Unapologetic. Final. And I'll think about the £8.50 I spent. £8. 50 pence. It bought me silence. And sometimes that's all you need. There's this thing that happens after chaos dies down. Not peace. Peace would have been too generous. It's more like an echo. You keep hearing the crash long after the wreckage has been cleared. The sound of what just happened follows you around. A little quieter each day but never quite gone. That's where I was. The new flat was fine. Bland in a safe way. White walls, beige carpet, and a wardrobe that creaked like it had a secret. The kind of place where no memories had been made yet. Nothing in it belonged to him, not even by accident. That was the point. I bought second-hand furniture off Facebook Marketplace and avoided anything that reminded me of our old life. No blackout curtains, he'd insisted on those. No leather beanbag chair. I got rid of the rug we used to sit on during our so-called movie nights, which were really just him choosing films and me pretending I wasn't bored out of my mind. Still, the ghost of him followed me. In small ways. I'd catch myself reaching for his brand of cereal in the supermarket, then stop, hand hovering in the air like I'd forgotten my own body. I'd hear someone laugh in a pub, a sharp, too loud nasal laugh, and for a split second I'd brace, thinking it was him. I'd smell his cologne on someone passing by and freeze. It wasn't longing. It was habit. A dull echo of something I'd trained myself to respond to. That's the cruel thing about long relationships. You don't just lose the person. You lose parts of your reflexes. But slowly, very slowly, I began reclaiming my space. I started keeping a journal. Nothing fancy, just a battered notebook from Poundland. I didn't write poetry or profound epiphanies. Just little things I noticed, things that annoyed me, thoughts I wouldn't say out loud. I found myself scribbling in it late at night, half asleep, half angry, the pen moving faster than my brain. It felt like clearing a blocked pipe, letting the rust run out. And then one day, out of nowhere, something happened that felt normal. I got caught in the rain. Proper British sideways rain, where your socks soak through in seconds and your hood does absolutely nothing. My umbrella snapped inside out. I was wearing jeans that clung to my legs like cold seaweed, and I had 3 bags of shopping pulling my shoulders down like anchors. But as I turned the corner to my building, drenched and shivering, I started laughing. Not the polite, tired kind. A real full-bodied laugh. The kind that cracks something open. Because it was awful. And ridiculous. And I was alone, but not in that hollow, echoing way. I was alone in a way that felt like mine. My disaster, my moment, my rain-soaked humiliation. And for the first time in months, I didn't think about him. Not once. That was the turning point. From there, it didn't get magical. There was no montage of self-discovery and instant healing. It was slow. Ordinary. But things began to change. I made friends with a girl from my study group, Layla. She was loud in the best way, wore green eyeliner like it was a war paint, and didn't flinch when I made dark jokes about exes and overdraft fees. We bonded over mutual hatred of a particular professor and bad coffee from the uni cafe. She didn't ask too many questions and I didn't offer too many answers. That suited me just fine. Work at the bar improved too. My manager finally replaced the dishwasher that used to sound like it was dying every cycle. I got promoted to shift lead, which meant a slight pay bump and slightly more annoying customers. But I could handle it. After what I'd been through, a drunk guy calling me darlin', Wasn't exactly a crisis. And then just when I'd convinced myself I'd made it out the other side, I ran into him. It was a Thursday. I'd left campus late and decided to cut through the shopping precinct, half empty now that most of the shops had closed. I had my headphones in, scarf up over my chin, eyes on my phone. I almost didn't see him, but something made me look up. There he was, across the square, leaning against the entrance to a vape shop. Hoodie up, beard longer, paler than I remembered, like he hadn't been outside much. His eyes swept over the street, glassy and unfocused. He didn't see me. I stopped in my tracks. My heartbeat shot into my throat, not from fear, just from shock. Seeing him was like opening a cupboard and finding something you'd thrown out months ago. Like a bad smell returning when you thought you'd cleaned every inch. He looked hollow. Not tragic, not broken. Just used up. I stayed still. Watched him fumble in his pocket, pull out a phone, then curse and shove it back in. He seemed twitchy, like someone who expected bad news at any second. And he looked older. Not in a natural way. In a way that comes from stress. From failure. I didn't approach him. Didn't speak. I turned on my heel and walked the long way home. Even though it added 20 minutes. I didn't want him to see me. I didn't want him to know I was still in the same city. I didn't want to risk the possibility of hearing his voice again. That night I didn't sleep. My brain spiraled. Not with regret. Not with longing. But with rage. All over again. A second wave. Like seeing him had cracked open the seal I pressed down so tightly. I kept replaying everything. The way he used to take the last bit of milk and then lie about it. The way he'd gaslight me into thinking I'd forgotten something. The way he'd pick fights right before my exams. Then sulk when I asked for space to study. The little cruelties that didn't look like cruelty at the time. The slow erosion of self-esteem, masked as laziness, masked as charm. And the money. God, the money. I still couldn't look at my old bank statements without feeling like I'd been mugged in slow motion. But then I remembered the forum. And I logged in. His profile was still there. No posts in weeks. But the history, still public. And buried deep in the thread titles was one I hadn't seen before. Urgent help, 3 CCJs and debt collectors chasing. What can I do? I clicked. The thread was a mess. He'd posted a screed about unfair systems, malicious people, and being targeted by someone bitter. He didn't name me, but it was clear who he meant. And the replies? Most were unhelpful. But one stood out. Someone with experience in debt recovery. Their comment was long, clinical, detailed. They broke down what steps he could take. But the final paragraph made me sit back in my chair. Be aware. It only takes one payment to reset the limitation period. Even if it's a penny. Someone knew what they were doing. You've got a long road ahead. I closed the laptop. I didn't smile. Didn't feel triumphant. Just affirmed. He could lie. He could twist the story. He could play the victim. But the damage was real. And he knew, somewhere deep down, that he'd done it to himself. There's something strange about knowing you've won, but not feeling like you've won anything. It's like watching your enemy fall into the pit they dug for you. And all you feel is tired. That's where I was, caught between vindication and something emptier. I wasn't thinking about revenge anymore. That part of me had quieted. Now I was just trying to remember who I'd been before him, before all of it. Like digging through old boxes in your loft, trying to find a photo that proves you were once someone else. But it's not easy to unearth yourself after being buried for so long. I kept trying. I went to every lecture. I submitted all my assignments on time. I kept my shifts at the bar and started budgeting again. Rebuilding what I'd lost pound by pound. I even started reading for pleasure, something I hadn't done in ages. But I noticed something odd. I could only focus on stories where nothing bad ever happened. No betrayals, no sudden twists. Just quiet lives, soft endings. Layla noticed. You've gone full grandma, she said one afternoon, plucking a paperback from my bag and reading the blurb aloud. A woman who opens a bakery in the Cotswolds? What happened to murder mysteries and Russian existentialism? I just shrugged. Guess I've had enough drama for a while. She didn't push it. She never did. That's why I trusted her. She was the first person I told the full story to. We were walking home from the pub after our shift. Hands red from the cold, breath steaming in the streetlights. Something about the emptiness of the streets made it feel safe. Like the world had shrunk to just us and the sound of our boots hitting the pavement. I had a joint account with him, I said suddenly. He cleaned it out when he left. Took everything I had. Over $5,000. Layla didn't react right away. Just walked beside me slow and steady. I tried the police, the bank, nothing they could do. So I did something petty. I spent £8.50 to reset all his debt clocks. Gave the creditors his new address. A few months later, the bailiffs took everything. Still no reaction. No gasp. No judgment. After a moment she said, "You're the reason he posted about losing his stuff on those forums, aren't you?" I nodded. She laughed. A short, sharp laugh that cracked open the night. "Legend," she said. "I mean horrible. But also legend." I grinned. I thought I'd feel better. Like I'd healed something. But it just made everything louder. "Yeah," she said. "That's the thing about closure. It's not an event. It's a choice you have to make 100 times. Some days you'll make it. Some days you won't." That stuck with me. I wrote it in my journal later. Closure isn't an event. It's a choice. I started making that choice. Every day, bit by bit. I unfollowed the forum. I deleted the screenshots I'd saved. I let his name become something I didn't flinch at anymore. But then something happened I didn't expect. He emailed me. Not a burner account. Not some anonymous message. His real name. Real email. Full subject line. "I'm sorry." I stared at it for a long time. Didn't open it. Just looked at the timestamp, 3:04 a.m., and imagined him typing it in the dark, his fingers trembling, his face lit by the pale glow of a screen. The subject line was like a trapdoor under my feet, because part of me wanted to read it. Wanted to see if he finally understood the damage he'd done. If he finally saw me as more than the background character in his never-ending drama. But another part of me didn't care. And that was new. I left it unopened. Archived it. Didn't delete it. Just moved it somewhere quiet. Somewhere I wouldn't trip over it every time I checked my inbox. I didn't need an apology to move on. That was the hardest thing to admit. I always thought closure had to come from them. From a reckoning. But it didn't. Closure was learning how to stop asking for explanations you already knew you'd never get. He did what he did because he could. Because he thought I wouldn't fight back. Because in his mind I was soft. Forgiving. A doormat with a smile. And for a while I was. But not anymore. Not now. The next time I saw him, it wasn't in person. It was in a photograph. A mutual friend posted a group picture. Some birthday party I hadn't been invited to. There he was, tucked at the edge of the frame. Thinner. Grayer around the eyes. Still trying to look carefree, beer raised mid-toast. But his smile didn't reach his eyes. And for the first time I didn't feel rage. Or fear. Or vindication. I felt distance. Like he was someone I used to know in a dream. Blurry. Forgettable. Unimportant. That night I opened my laptop and I applied for a new job. Not just a bar shift. A real one. It was with a local publishing house. Admin assistant, part-time, but a foot in the door. Somewhere that wasn't soaked in beer and regret. I nailed the interview. They hired me on the spot. And on my first day, as I walked into the building, nerves rattling in my chest, I passed a mirror in the entryway. I stopped. Stared. Not at my outfit or my hair. To my eyes. They looked clear. Focused. Free. And for the first time in what felt like years I saw myself again. It's strange, starting over when you're still carrying the old version of yourself on your back like a worn-out rucksack. You don't just walk into a new life clean. You drag pieces of the past with you. Some jagged, some familiar, all of them stitched into your skin. But that publishing job? That was the first time in a long while I felt like I was stepping forward instead of just surviving. My desk was tucked in the corner of a small open-plan office, right under a buzzing light that flickered if the kettle and microwave were on at the same time. There were maybe 12 of us total. Everyone had a slightly disheveled look. Coffee stains on sleeves, biscuit crumbs on keyboards. My kind of people. The first week, I barely spoke to anyone beyond polite nods and the occasional "do you want milk in that?" But something about the silence felt different here. Not threatening. Not like the silence I knew from my old flat, where it filled every crack like mold. This silence had room in it. Breathing room. By week 2, I found myself smiling at the receptionist, even laughing when one of the editors, James, a guy with permanently ink-stained fingers, told a story about a manuscript so bad it made someone cry. Not in a mean way. Just real. Honest. I started wearing lipstick again. Not for anyone else. Just because I wanted to look like someone who had her life together, even if only from the neck up. Layla noticed immediately. "Someone's glowing," she said as we met for coffee one Saturday, eyeing me over her oat milk latte. "New job, new vibe. When are we going shopping to upgrade your—" I used to date a leech wardrobe. I laughed harder than I had in months. We walked the high street together that afternoon, ducking into charity shops and trying on coats we couldn't afford, rating each one on a scale from, "This says I have a mortgage," to, "This says I've definitely buried a body." It was stupid. And fun. And healing in a way therapy hadn't quite managed yet. But of course the peace didn't last. Because life doesn't tie up that neatly. It was mid-March. Still cold enough that your breath hung in the air like a ghost. I was sitting at my desk, typing out invoices when my phone buzzed. Blocked number. I froze. It rang out. I let it. Then came the voicemail icon. One new message. I stared at it for hours. Didn't listen. Later that night, a Facebook message came through. This time from someone I hadn't heard from in years. Matt. One of his old friends. The kind who always pretended to be neutral but never quite managed it. His message was blunt. "Hey, look, I'm staying out of it. But I thought you should know. He's saying you ruined his life. People are starting to believe it. Just giving you a heads up." I didn't reply. Not because I didn't care. Because I didn't trust myself to say anything that wouldn't feel like poison in my throat. I sat in my tiny kitchen for hours that night, back against the cold radiator, replaying every single thing I'd done. Had I gone too far? Had I really ruined him? But that's the trick of people like him. They leave you questioning your own reality. Even when the facts are etched into your memory, they manage to twist the lens until you start doubting your own story. So I pulled out the notebook, flipped to the first page, reread every word I'd written in those nights after he left. The financial stress, the manipulation, the cheating, the theft, the lies, the helplessness. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't vindictive. I was done being silent. That week I met with a uni counselor. Told her everything. Not because I needed validation, but because I needed someone outside of my own head to witness it. To say, yes, that happened. Yes, it was wrong. No, you're not imagining it. She did. And then she said something I didn't expect. "Have you ever considered writing about it?" I blinked at her. "Like, for myself?" She smiled gently. "Or for others. People think they're alone in this kind of experience. But they're not. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is tell the truth." Stuck with me. All the way home. All through dinner. Even as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the neighbor's dog bark at shadows. So I did. I wrote. Not fiction. Not flowery metaphors. Just the truth. I wrote about the first time he made me feel stupid in front of our friends. I wrote about working back-to-back shifts while he slept until 3 p.m. I wrote about hiding letters from debt collectors so our guests wouldn't see them on the table. I wrote about the night I found out. And the numbness that followed. And I wrote about the £8.50. When I was done, I didn't post it anywhere. Just saved it to a folder titled "For Me." But it felt like something shifted. Like I'd taken back a little more ground. That same week, I got an email from James at work. Subject. Quick favor? He was overloaded, he said. Could I read through a few submissions and flag anything interesting? I said yes. 2 days later, I handed in my notes. He raised an eyebrow. Did you used to work in publishing? He asked. I shook my head. Just been reading people all my life. He smiled. You've got good instincts. I walked home that evening with a weightless feeling in my chest. Maybe I wasn't just rebuilding. Maybe I was becoming someone new. I didn't expect to see my words printed. But a month later, James dropped a small stapled booklet on my desk. Thought this might interest you, he said, too casually. I turned it over. It was the company's internal zine, something they did quarterly. A place where staff could submit writing, poems, reviews. And there it was. Page 7. A cleaned-up excerpt from my story. He hadn't used names. He hadn't asked for drama. He'd just taken a piece of what I'd written, tightened it up, and included it like it was just another slice of human experience, like it belonged. My chest tightened as I read it. I didn't even remember half the sentences being that sharp. But there they were, printed in black ink, surrounded by a plain border and a quiet sense of dignity. Not spectacle. Not shame. Just truth. No one at work said anything about it. No sly glances. No "is that about you?" whispers in the break room. Just quiet respect. And that made it all the more powerful. I hadn't felt proud of myself in a long time. That night, I walked home slower than usual. Took the long route again, through the side streets lined with blooming cherry trees and old red brick terraces. The sun was low, golden and heavy, and everything looked dusted in fire. I stopped at a bench near the river. Sat down. Watched the light hit the water. And I thought, I made it. Not out of everything. Not clean. But through. You never get out untouched. But you get out. A week later I saw Layla again. We met at her place, ordered too much Thai food, and sat on the floor of her studio flat, eating straight from the cartons and throwing empty spring roll packets across the room like we were 12 again. "You seem lighter," she said, licking sauce off her thumb. "Less like you're holding your breath." I nodded. "I feel less like I'm on alert all the time." She paused, then said something I hadn't expected. "Would you ever talk to him again?" I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't know, but because I knew exactly. "No," I said. "Not even if he apologized in person. Not even if he cried. I don't need him to see anything anymore. That part of me's done." She smiled. "Good. That's the line. Keep it." And I did. For months nothing new happened. That's not a bad thing. Nothing is peaceful. Nothing is space to breathe. I kept working at the publishing house. Got a small raise. Took on more responsibilities. Even started proofreading chapters for real clients. Sometimes I'd stay late just to feel the silence of the office after hours, the way the hum of the printer softened, the way the radiator clicked like an old dog stretching. I liked the quiet now. It no longer sounded like absence. It sounded like calm. But then a strange email arrived. From an unknown address. No name. No subject. Just this: "You don't know the full story. You only saw what he wanted you to see." For a moment my stomach turned. But then I breathed, read it again, and realized what it was. Manipulation. Again. The same script, different actor. Maybe it was him. Maybe one of his friends. Maybe someone who'd heard a skewed version of the past. It didn't matter. Because the message behind the message was simple. Doubt yourself. But I didn't. I closed the laptop and made tea. I didn't respond. Didn't feed it. That was the real revenge in the end, not the debt resets, not the bailiffs, not the chaos. This was it. The quiet refusal to engage. To bite. I had something he'd never have: peace. Weeks passed. My journal got thinner and thinner as the entries slowed. Eventually I didn't need it anymore. I still kept it on my shelf just in case. But the urgency had gone. I wasn't drowning in thoughts anymore. I was just living. And one day, in the middle of filing some dull paperwork, James turned to me and said, "You ever think about writing full-time?" I blinked. "What?" He shrugged. "I've read your stuff. The voice is there. You've got a way of cutting straight through the fluff. Not easy to teach." I laughed. "You mean I sound blunt?" "I mean you sound honest," he said. That word landed somewhere deep. Honest. I hadn't felt that way in years. Not even with myself. But now? Maybe. I didn't make any big decisions right away. But I started writing again. Real writing. Late at night after dinner. I'd sit at my kitchen table, the hum of the fridge my only companion, and pour my stories out. Not about him, not anymore, but about me. Who I used to be. Who I was becoming. Who I still wanted to be. And for once none of it was about revenge. It was just about truth. You'd think life would slow down once you let go of the storm. But it doesn't. It reshapes. Changes rhythm. Not calmer necessarily, just different. Less sharp around the edges. Less likely to knock the breath out of you when you're not looking. I had structure now. Mondays were emails. Tuesdays were copy edits. Wednesdays I did tea rounds and tried not to mess up anyone's oat milk preference. Thursdays Layla and I had our standing evening walk and rant session. Fridays were a coin flip. Either I passed out early from exhaustion or I stayed up late writing until my eyes burned. There was something sacred about that balance, even in its ordinariness. One night while writing, I found myself circling the same line over and over. It wasn't dramatic or lyrical or clever. It just said, "He doesn't get to be the reason I stopped trusting people." That was the final weight I hadn't realized I was carrying, because I wasn't afraid of him anymore. I was afraid of becoming hard, brittle, suspicious of everyone who dared get too close. I'd seen it happen to people. One betrayal turns into a philosophy, a worldview. I didn't want that. I wanted softness again, on my terms. And almost like the universe was listening, or maybe just cruelly ironic, that's when I met Theo. It started in the break room of all places. He wasn't even from our department. Just someone in sales who microwaved fish and got loudly scolded for it by reception. I rolled my eyes as he tried to play innocent, waving his hands around and laughing like a golden retriever in human form. But when he turned and saw me watching from the kettle, he smiled. Not in a sleazy, "Hey baby" kind of way. Just genuine, like I was in on the joke. Next day he was back. With a non-fish lunch this time. "Trying to change my reputation," he said as he poured soup into a Tupperware lid. "Not sure that's possible," I said. "You scarred half the floor." I believe in redemption arcs. That made me laugh. Over the next few weeks we kept bumping into each other. In the stairwell. By the vending machine. At the security desk signing out late. It wasn't flirty, not at first. Just easy. Uncomplicated. I found myself looking forward to those moments. To how he made everything feel a little lighter. He wasn't like the others. No sharp edges. No power games. He listened. Asked questions and actually waited for answers. And when he laughed, it wasn't at me. It was never at me. I started saying yes to things again. Yes to drinks after work. Yes to brunch on Sundays. Yes to sitting a little too close on the sofa and pretending not to notice when our knees touched. One evening, walking home from a late shift, he turned to me under the lamplight and said, "Can I ask you something personal?" My stomach did a little twist. "Sure. You always seem like you're braced for something. Like you're expecting the floor to drop out." I stopped walking. Not because I was offended, but because he wasn't wrong. "Yeah," I said. "I used to live with someone who liked pulling floors." He didn't ask more. Just nodded. And then, without pressure, without ceremony, said, "You deserve to walk without flinching." That hit me harder than I expected. We didn't start dating immediately. I needed time. Space. But the idea settled in my chest like a quiet light. Maybe I could trust someone again. Not blindly but openly. Carefully. With intention. But of course, life doesn't move in perfect straight lines. A few weeks later, Layla texted me at 1 a.m. "Layla, check this now. You're not gonna believe it." I rubbed my eyes, unlocked my phone, and saw the link. It was a post. On a newer forum. Not one I'd ever visited. But familiar names started popping up in the thread. And there he was. My ex. Same username. Same smug tone. He was telling a very different story. That I had used him. That I'd lived off his money while he supported me through emotional instability. That I'd weaponized the legal system against him when he tried to leave. He claimed I sent anonymous threats to his new partner. That I stalked him. That I tried to destroy his financial future out of bitterness. It was like watching someone forge a version of you out of oil and smoke. Something twisted. Unrecognizable. But the worst part? People were believing it. Comment after comment validating him. Calling me unhinged. Parasite. A cautionary tale. I sat there frozen. Fists clenched. Shaking. Not from anger but from something deeper. Something more primal. Like being gaslit all over again. But this time in public. Where anyone could read it. Where anyone could take it as truth. I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling until the first bird started. Then I opened my laptop. And I wrote. Not as a defense. Not to argue. I wrote the whole story again. This time for me, but also for anyone else who'd been silenced. Reshaped by someone else's lies. I called it my £8.50 revenge. Just a draft. But it felt powerful. True. Still, I didn't know what to do with it. Yet, the thing about being lied about online is that it's not loud at first. It's quiet. creeping. Like a leak in the ceiling you don't notice until the plaster caves in. I didn't respond to the post. I didn't reach out to him. And I didn't defend myself in the thread, even though every cell in my body screamed to do just that. To yell into the void, that's not what happened. That's not who I am. Because I knew how it would go. He'd twist my words. He'd screenshot, repost, claim victimhood again. That's what people like him do, create a stage, then hand you the script daring you to read your part. And the second you do, they claim control of the narrative. But I wasn't playing that game anymore. Still, it got under my skin. Not just the lies. The audacity. How he could rewrite history in real time, knowing that the people reading didn't know me. Didn't know the sleepless nights. The breakdowns. The missed meals. The overdrafts. The little humiliations that added up like rot behind a wall. He got to walk away with the story. But not anymore. That week, I emailed the zine editor at work. Told her I'd written something longer. Personal. That it might be worth a look for the next issue. She read it the same day. Asked if I was okay. Then said yes. The piece would go in the summer issue. Unabridged. No edits. It was the first time someone outside my little circle would hear the full version of what happened. I expected fear. But what I felt was closer to relief. Like I'd finally opened a window in a room that had been locked shut for years. And then right on cue something unexpected happened. Theo found the post. He didn't tell me at first. I only knew because he started acting strange, quieter, more cautious. One night I found him in the kitchen, scrolling with that look people get when they're reading something they shouldn't be. He looked up, caught my eye, and set the phone down like it was a weapon. Was any of it true? He asked gently. I didn't get angry. I didn't cry. I just told him everything. And when I was done, he didn't ask for proof. Didn't need receipts. He just said, okay. Then he pulled me in and held me. Not like he was saving me. Like I didn't need saving at all. That was the difference. The story went live the following week. Our office zine was hardly a viral publication. But still, people read it. Coworkers I barely knew stopped me in the kitchen to say thank you. One of the junior editors left a sticky note on my desk that said, "Your piece was quietly devastating." In the best way. Even James, normally half asleep before lunch, came over and said, "You should be writing for more than just us." It stirred something in me. A tiny voice. What if this story had reach? What if it helped someone else who was still in that flat, still chasing their breath, still convincing themselves it wasn't that bad? I dusted off the draft and started editing. Tighter sentences. Fewer tangents. Sharper rhythm. I changed the title. My £8.50 revenge on the man who took everything from me. Clickbait. Maybe. But true. Theo helped me proof it. He didn't try to fix the parts that were raw. He just made sure I hadn't missed a comma or two. And when it was done, I submitted it anonymously to a platform that published first-person essays. I didn't tell anyone. Didn't expect anything. Just hit send and went back to making dinner. It blew up in 3 days. Over 100,000 views by the end of the week. Then 250,000. The comments flooded in. People thanking me. People sharing their own stories. People saying they finally found the words to describe what had happened to them. One message hit harder than all the others. From a woman who simply wrote, "I thought I was crazy. Your story made me feel sane again." I cried reading it. Not because of the pain, but because something finally made sense. It had never been about the £5,000. It had been about the silence. The silence he left me with. And I'd broken it. Loudly. The funny thing about going viral is that your life doesn't actually change, not right away. The dishes still pile up. Your bills still show up on time. You still have to queue for the bus behind a woman arguing loudly on the phone about her neighbor's recycling habits. But something had shifted. Not in the world. In me. I didn't walk with my shoulders hunched anymore. I wasn't constantly rehearsing fake conversations in my head, in case I ran into him, or one of his defenders, or someone who'd read the twisted version of my story first. I didn't brace for the worst every time I checked my phone. I wasn't just surviving. I was beginning to own what had happened. Because here's the thing people don't tell you about reclaiming your story. It's not about rewriting it. It's about finally putting your name on the byline. Saying, yes, this happened. And yes, I lived through it. That's power. That's freedom. The day the essay crossed the 1,000,000 views mark, I walked home in the rain without an umbrella. Let it soak straight through my coat, and didn't care. It felt like washing off a version of myself I didn't recognize anymore. That night, I got an email from someone at a production company. Short, professional, direct. We read your story and think it could be adapted. Would you consider a meeting? I stared at the screen. Not with shock, but with a weird, calm sense of inevitability. Like, of course this story wanted to keep moving. It had always wanted to keep moving. The meeting was 2 days later. Online. A producer, a junior writer, and a woman named Maya who handled story development. They were kind. Not sensationalist. Not after drama. Just interested. We think there's something really powerful in the everydayness of it, Maya said. The way it builds slowly. How it feels like it could happen to anyone. It had happened to anyone. To hundreds, thousands more. That's what made it so quietly horrifying. Would you want to stay involved? The producer asked. Write a treatment? Maybe a pilot. It hit me then. They weren't just buying my pain. They were inviting me to translate it into something more. I'd like that, I said. And I meant it. In the background, life kept unfolding in smaller, quieter ways. I got promoted. Not officially. But someone left and suddenly I was doing more than one job, and eventually they gave me the title to match it. Theo and I started seeing each other properly. No more dancing around it. We didn't need labels, but we needed honesty. He never pushed. Never probed. Just showed up, again and again, until I realized I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop anymore. And one night, after dinner, curled up on the sofa with the last of the wine and our legs tangled, he asked, "Do you ever think you'd talk to him again?" It was the second time someone had asked me that. This time the answer came easier. No, I said. Not because I hate him. Because I don't think he'd hear me even now. Theo nodded. That's fair. And that was the end of it. No drama. No philosophical unpacking. Just quiet agreement. That's how I knew I was with the right person. Not because he protected me, but because I didn't need protection anymore. The essay stayed online. Some weeks it would quiet down. Others, it would flare back into the algorithm. I started getting speaking requests, panel invites, DMs from survivors and advocates and strangers just needing to say, thank you. It never stopped being strange, but it stopped being scary. That was the key. One afternoon I got a text from Layla. Layla, he's posted again. I didn't reply. She followed up. Layla, don't look. It's the same nonsense. Just louder now. And that's when I realized something else. He needed the attention now. He needed to be seen as wronged. Because without that narrative, he was just a man who took and lost. A man whose entire identity had been built on the lie that everyone else was worse than him. He wasn't adapting. He was rotting in place. And I was moving. Forward. Fast. I stopped checking the forums altogether. Deleted bookmarks. Cleared my history. Removed the alerts. It was like turning off a drip feed of poison I didn't realize I'd still been drinking from. Instead, I started writing fiction again. New characters. New worlds. All rooted in the same emotional truths but transformed. I let them fall in love. Let them lose everything. Let them crawl out of it. Let them rebuild. Always I let them rebuild. Because that's the part people forget to tell you. That the rebuilding is where the story lives. Not in the ruin. In the return. The first time I saw my story on screen, it wasn't glamorous. No red carpet. No press. Just a cold weekday night, laptop open on the kitchen counter, Theo sitting cross-legged on the sofa, and me gripping a mug of tea like it was an anchor. It wasn't even finished, just a rough visual treatment. Early stage stuff. Scratch audio. Temp footage. Notes scrawled in the margins about tone and texture and emotional temperature. But it was mine. My words. My story. Played out in soft, flickering light on a cracked screen while the oven clicked behind me and the radiator hissed like it was bored. And still it hit me. Hard. There was a moment, just a small one, where the character me and some version of me sat alone on a bed, scrolling through an empty bank app, her face slowly crumpling. No music. No sound. Just silence. And I felt it. All of it. Like I'd time-traveled back into that skin. Just long enough to remember the weight of it. And then Theo's hand found mine. That brought me back. You okay? He asked. I nodded. Couldn't speak. That silence meant everything. Not long after, the producers asked if I wanted to be more involved in the next stage. Writing, consulting, maybe even taking on some voiceover. There's something about your voice on the page, Maya said. It doesn't flinch. I thought about that word for days. Flinch. How often I'd done exactly that. With words. With people. With myself. Not anymore. I said yes. Work changed after that. Not in a bad way, just in a noticeable one. People started treating me differently. Some with admiration. Some with discomfort. A few, usually the ones who quietly benefited from women staying quiet, kept their distance, unsure of what to say. One afternoon, a junior staffer caught me in the lift. "You're the one who wrote that piece, right?" I nodded. She looked down at her hands, then back up. "My sister went through something similar," she said. "She always thought she was just dramatic. After I showed her your essay, she cried. Like really cried." I swallowed. "I've been that sister." She nodded. "I just wanted to say thanks." That was enough. More than enough. But of course nothing stays simple for long. Not in real life. A few days later I got a letter. A real one. Envelope. Stamp. No return address. The handwriting stopped me cold. I knew it. Even after everything. Even years later. Even through the trembling. It was his. I didn't open it right away. Just stared at it on my kitchen table for hours, like it might bite if I got too close. Theo came in halfway through me pouring my third glass of wine. He didn't ask. Just sat down across from me and waited. Finally, I pushed the envelope toward him. He didn't touch it. "Do you want to open it?" "I don't know." "You don't have to." I shook my head. "But I kind of need to." So I did. It wasn't long. Not emotional. Not explosive. Just cold. Matter of fact. He'd seen the story. He recognized the events, but insisted they were misrepresented. Claimed I was milking something mutual. Accused me of trying to make a name off someone else's mistakes. No apology. Not even fake remorse. Just a veiled threat disguised as righteousness. And somehow it didn't wreck me. It should have. But instead I just sat there and thought, this is all he has left. His last power play. His final stab. A letter he knew would land with enough weight to make me doubt myself again. But it didn't. Because this time I knew who I was. Not the girl on the floor crying over a bank account. Not the one walking on eggshells through a filthy kitchen. Not the one biting her tongue when friends asked if everything was okay. I was this version. Writing. Speaking. Living. Loving. So I folded the letter. Slipped it into a shoebox with other relics from that life. Not to keep. Just to contain. Then I poured the wine down the sink and made tea instead. Because there was work to do. And I wasn't flinching. The next morning, I woke up with something unexpected in my chest. Not dread. Not rage. Clarity. Like someone had taken a cloth to a fogged-up window inside me and finally let the light in. It wasn't about him anymore. The letter, the story, the whole ugly arc of it had finally completely left him behind. I wasn't reacting to his presence. I was responding to my own. And that was the difference. That was everything. Still, I kept the letter in the shoebox, sealed it tight with an elastic band. Some people burn those things. I didn't need to. I wasn't afraid of it catching fire. I was just done giving it oxygen. A few weeks passed and something strange began to happen. People kept reaching out, not just to say thank you but to tell their own stories. Long ones. Scattered ones. Half-whispered. Half-typed confessions that had never seen daylight before. It was overwhelming but not in the way you'd expect. It wasn't their pain that crushed me. It was their permission. They were offering me their lives piece by piece because I'd offered mine first. And there was a sort of sacredness to that. A shared language among survivors. A rhythm of recognition. But one message hit harder than the rest. It came from someone I didn't know but whose name stopped me. Grace. His ex before me. The one he never talked about except to say she was crazy. Toxic. Controlling. She'd written a single paragraph. Just enough to let me know that she'd read the essay, seen the forums, and despite all the years and all the distance, she believed me. Then she wrote. He did the same thing to me. Not the money but everything else. The isolation. The emotional whiplash. The rewriting. Thank you for telling the truth. That was it. No invitation to chat. No drama. Just solidarity. I stared at the message for a long time, then whispered, "You weren't crazy." And then to myself, neither was I. By spring, the treatment had moved into full script development. I was brought in to consult, but by then they'd already decided they wanted my voice narrating it. Not someone like me. Me. That meant hours in a studio, headphones on, voice tight in my throat as I read my own life aloud line by line. I didn't think it would be hard. But it was. There was a section I kept tripping on. The part where I say, it wasn't that he stopped loving me. It was that he never really started. He loved the version of me who didn't ask for anything, who didn't challenge him, who didn't interrupt the story he told himself about being a good man. That line caught in my throat every time, because saying it out loud meant admitting it out loud. And that's the thing about healing. It's never linear. Sometimes it sneaks up on you like a knife in a soft pocket. Still, I got through the session, took a break, breathed deep, and when we finished, the sound engineer, a quiet woman with chipped nails and kind eyes, walked over and said, "My sister needed this story. I'm going to send it to her." That made every stutter worth it. One afternoon, while going over some rewrites at work, I got a message from Layla. "Layla, you ready to destroy him publicly yet?" I laughed. "Me? Already done." Quietly. Classily. "Layla. Gross. But I support it." We met up later that night at our usual pub. She wore red lipstick that made her look dangerous and untouchable. I told her so. She rolled her eyes and said, "Well, I learned from the best." She toasted to survival. I toasted to not being bitter. She made a face. I am bitter. But in a hot, productive way. And maybe that was the new blueprint. Not moving on like it never happened, but carrying it like armor. Stylish, sharp-edged, custom-fit. That weekend, I visited my parents. I hadn't told them everything. Only what I'd been able to say in safe, digestible bites. But I brought the essay with me this time. Printed. Clean. Sharp. I handed it to my mum while we sat in the garden, the light low and kind. She read it in silence, then set it down and said, "You didn't deserve any of that." And I cried. Not because it was new, but because I needed to hear it from her. From someone who'd known me since the beginning. Someone who didn't have to say it but did anyway. She held my hand like I was still 7. "You're not broken," she said. "You're just reforged." The day the first cut of the project aired, a limited web series, 6 short episodes, I got more messages than I could count. Strangers. Friends. Quiet people who never comment on anything. Theo brought home cheap champagne. We toasted with mugs. It wasn't a viral explosion. It was something better. Steady. Real. A ripple. One that wouldn't stop. And somewhere out there, maybe he was watching. Maybe not. It didn't matter. Because by then, I knew something I hadn't known at the start. Revenge is loud. But healing is louder. And it lasts longer. Somewhere between the final edits and the quiet rise of the series, I stopped dreaming about him. That was how I knew it was really over. No more half-sleep flashbacks of cold kitchens or slammed doors. No more sudden jolts awake, heart racing because I thought I heard his keys at the door. My nights became still again. Undisturbed. Like the tide pulling back after years of flooding. And in that stillness something grew. Not just healing, but space. And when there's space, real open space, new things start to move in. One of them was the offer. It came in via email late one Monday afternoon. I was half asleep at my desk, the leftover haze of a slow weekend still hanging around my shoulders. The subject line just read, "Publication opportunity. From essay to memoir?" I clicked. And blinked. Twice. A small but respected publisher. Not the one I worked for. One that dealt almost entirely in narrative nonfiction. They'd read the essay. Seen the series. Wanted to know if I'd considered expanding it into a book. A memoir. I sat there, frozen, the cursor blinking like it was taunting me. I hadn't considered it. Not seriously. The idea of laying everything bare again, but longer, richer, more vulnerable, terrified me. But in that fear, I also felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Desire. Not for revenge. For voice. For authorship. For truth that didn't hide behind fiction or performance or anecdote. Just me in full. I wrote back. Yes. I've considered it. Let's talk. Theo was the first person I told. He didn't blink. Just nodded and said, you should do it. Layla was next. She screamed in the middle of a quiet cafe and knocked her coffee into my lap. Then she demanded naming rights to at least one chapter. Call it the one where Layla told you so. We laughed until people stared. I didn't care. Writing the book was harder than anything that came before. Not because the story had changed, but because I had. Revisiting the old journal entries, those jagged late-night ramblings full of panic and hurt, I hardly recognized the voice. She was still me, yes, but smaller. Shrunken from shame. It hurt to meet her again. But I kept going. Chapter by chapter I peeled back the layers. I talked about the subtle things, how he stopped saying thank you. How he made me feel guilty for needing help. How he'd joke about how exhausting I was, always followed with, you know I'm kidding, right? I wrote about the silences. The days where he didn't speak to me except to ask what was for dinner. How that silence was worse than shouting. How it made me feel like I was disappearing in plain sight. I included the £8.50 moment, of course. And this time I let it take up space. I gave it context. Not just the action, but the history that led to it. The 1,000 tiny humiliations that stacked until the only way to breathe again was to strike back in the quietest, sharpest way I knew how. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming the version of me who had fought back. She deserved the spotlight. The publisher loved the manuscript. We went through edits. Copy edits. Proofs. The cover came last. A soft image, neutral tones, an open door in the distance, light flooding in. No photos. No names. Just the title. After £8.50. And my name underneath. In full. Not a username. Not initials. Me. That alone made my hands tremble when I held the first proof copy. I took a photo of it lying on my kitchen table, next to my chip mug and a mess of receipts and keys and notebooks, and sent it to my mom. She sent back one word. Proud. The launch was quiet but perfect. An indie bookshop. Yellow bulbs. Fold-out chairs and free wine that tasted like vinegar. Theo stood at the back, holding 2 plastic cups and smiling like a proud disaster. Layla introduced me, even though she wasn't on the schedule. She stood up, cleared her throat, and said, I'm not going to pretend I'm neutral. I'm biased. But this book? It's a life raft. And I've seen her build it plank by plank. I cried before I even opened my mouth. But I read anyway. My hands didn't shake. And afterward, a woman came up to me, eyes wide and wet, and said, I thought it was just me. It never is. That's the whole point. Sales weren't huge. But they were steady. The reviews were kind. Measured. Not sensationalized. And then, one afternoon, a letter arrived. No stamp this time. Typed. No return address. Just 2 lines. I know what I did. I just didn't think you'd survive it. But I see now that you did. No signature. I didn't need one. I read it once. Then I tore it into 4 clean pieces and dropped it into the bin. Because that was all it deserved. And I still had more to write. The press cycle started slow. A few blog mentions. An interview with a niche podcast that specialized in real-life survival stories. Then a piece in a mid-size women's magazine that made its rounds on social. But one article changed everything. It wasn't the biggest publication. Just a personal blog by a journalist who wrote about relationships and power and the emotional debris people live with. She didn't just summarize my story, she understood it. She dissected the £8.50 moment like it was a surgical cut, not a punchline. She wrote, This wasn't petty. This was strategic grief. This was someone reclaiming control, £1 at a time. Within 24 hours, the article had over 300,000 views. Then 500,000. People started quoting it, clipping it, tagging me. They called it the most emotionally satisfying act of justice no one saw coming. Others called it quiet rage with a purpose. My favorite? A comment that just said, she didn't burn his house down. She turned the lights on and let him see the mess he made. And just like that, the book became a thing. Talk show requests came. More podcasts. Panel discussions about emotional manipulation, financial abuse, and the new vocabulary of modern survival. Suddenly, people weren't just listening, they were naming things. Saying them out loud. Using my story to open conversations in places where silence had been the default. And in the center of it all was me. Still in the same flat. Still forgetting laundry in the washer. Still burning toast twice a week. But something had changed in how I moved through the world. I wasn't invisible anymore. Not even to myself. Theo bought a small bottle of champagne to celebrate the book's second reprint. We drank it out of mugs again, legs tucked under a blanket, reruns playing on low in the background. He asked me what was next. I didn't know. I just knew I wasn't done. There were other stories. Not just mine. Other women. Other voices. People who had emailed me, messaged me, stopped me on the street. They weren't looking for attention, they just wanted to be heard. And I knew how to do that now. I started outlining a podcast. Each episode would be a story, not necessarily loud or dramatic, but real. Everyday pain. Everyday power. I'd call it Quiet Fires. The idea burned hot and steady. Somewhere around the time I was putting the pilot together, I got a message I didn't expect. Grace again. This time longer. She told me she'd written something too. Not to publish. Just for herself. But it helped. Seeing the shape of it on paper where he couldn't twist it. She asked if I wanted to meet. I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to. Because I didn't know how it would feel to sit across from a living echo. But I said yes. We met at a quiet cafe tucked behind a bookshop. I recognized her instantly, though we'd never met. There was something haunted but luminous in her face. Like someone who'd been through the dark and wasn't afraid to show the cracks. We hugged awkwardly. Then sat. And for 2 full hours we told the same story from 2 completely different lives. Our details were different. The manipulations. The words. The punishments. But the pattern? The pattern was identical. Isolation. Control. Shame. False promises followed by subtle withdrawals of affection. You could swap our names, she said at one point, and no one would notice. I nodded. That's the most terrifying part. We didn't cry. We didn't even talk about him much beyond what was necessary. What we did talk about was who we'd become in spite of it. She taught yoga now. Ran a trauma-informed studio for women. Hosted quiet circles once a month. I told her about the podcast. The voiceover. The story that wouldn't leave me alone. When we left, we hugged again. Longer this time. Like we were closing a loop that had been open for far too long. That night, I opened a fresh document and typed just 4 words. He doesn't win anymore. I didn't know if it was a title, or a chapter, or a signpost. But it felt true. And truth was my favorite currency now. There was a brief moment, somewhere between the podcast going live and the 3rd reprint of the book, where I started waiting for the backlash. Not because I expected it, but because I'd spent so long conditioned to prepare for it. The pushback. The shaming. The anonymous comments from usernames with no profile pictures and too much time. But it didn't come. Not like before. The criticism, when it arrived, was milder. Petty. Desperate. You could tell it came from people who hadn't read beyond the headline, who still thought anger was something to be policed rather than understood. I didn't respond. Not out of fear. Out of power. Because what could they say that hadn't already been said to me by him, by his friends, by people who didn't believe me until they had to? Besides, I had other things to do. I was building something. The podcast took off faster than I planned. People didn't want drama, they wanted recognition. Episode after episode, I sat across from women, men, non-binary guests who'd all been made to feel small in some way. Forgotten. Misunderstood. Gaslit. Undone. Some had stories far more brutal than mine. Others were quieter, like being slowly erased by a partner who never raised their voice but also never said, "I'm proud of you." All of it mattered. And they trusted me. Because I wasn't asking for sensationalism. I was asking, what did it cost you to survive? And what did you build from the pieces? That became the tagline. Listeners sent in their own moments, small, powerful fragments. The guy who kept buying his own birthday cake every year just so he could still celebrate something. The woman who left a 20-year marriage with nothing but a dog, a car, and the playlist they used to dance to. A single mom who switched jobs 3 times in 1 year until she finally found a boss who didn't yell. Tiny rebellions. Quiet fires. And slowly, episode by episode, I realized something else. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't trying to win. I wasn't even trying to prove I was right. I was just living. Fully. Presently. And that was the final blow to everything he tried to control. Then one day it happened. A friend texted me. "Friend, hey, just a heads up. His girlfriend wrote something." At first I didn't understand. Me who? Friend, his girlfriend. The one he moved in with after you. My stomach dropped. Not from fear. From the awful anticipation that came with knowing someone else had been caught in the exact same trap. She hadn't written much. Just a blog post. But it said enough. She didn't name him. Didn't have to. The timeline, the habits, the damage, it all pointed to the same man. She talked about losing her job while supporting him. About the lies. The money. How he made her feel like she owed him for everything he hadn't done. And near the end, one quiet sentence stood out like a wound. I used to think I was the bad guy in someone else's story. Then I read hers. I stared at that line for a long time. Then I cried. Not for myself. For all of us. The breadcrumb trail of broken women behind one man who would never own what he did. Who would walk through life gathering pain like it was currency, then act surprised when someone finally shouted enough. She hadn't reached out to me. She didn't need to. She'd done what I did. She'd said it out loud. That was more than enough. The night that post went semi-viral, I recorded a solo episode of the podcast. No guests. Just me. The mic. A chair. A page of scattered notes. I didn't script it. Didn't rehearse. I just told the story again, this time with everything I knew now. With the whole arc, the whole jagged, bent timeline of it. Not for him. Not even for the audience. For her. The new ex. The one who'd thought she was losing her mind until she found my words and used them like a rope ladder. And when I finished, I ended with this. There's no revenge in healing. Just the audacity to exist loudly in the aftermath. You're not the villain in anyone's story. You're the survivor in your own. The next morning, my inbox was full. Messages from people who'd never spoken about what they'd endured. People who said that sentence had cracked something open. People who said thank you. But one message stood out. It was short. Just a name. And a subject line that read, "I'm so sorry." I clicked it. And froze. It wasn't from him. It was from his sister. Her name sat in my inbox like a fuse. I hadn't seen it in years. Not since a Christmas party where she tried to explain away his absence with a forced laugh and a shrug that said, "He's always like this." Back then, I'd wanted so badly to believe she wasn't like him. That somewhere in that family someone saw what I saw. But when everything fell apart, she vanished. Radio silence. No messages. No awkward half apologies. Just gone. And now out of nowhere, "I'm so sorry." I opened it. It was long. Measured. More careful than emotional. But I could feel the cracks in her restraint. She said she'd seen everything now. The essay. The podcast. The interview where I barely kept it together describing the bank account being emptied in the middle of the night. She said she believed me back then. She just didn't know how to show it. He always had a way of rewriting history before the ink dried, she wrote. I grew up thinking that was normal. That if I questioned him too hard, it meant I was disloyal. And then, I've spent the last year trying to untangle myself from the stories he told us. The stories we told ourselves to survive him. There it was. Survive him. Not just tolerate. Not excuse. Survive. I hadn't been the only one. I never was. She ended with, "You didn't imagine it. You weren't cruel. You weren't unstable. You were hurt and no one stood beside you. I'm so sorry I wasn't braver then. I'm trying to be now." I stared at the screen for a long time, hand over my mouth. Then I replied. I told her she didn't owe me anything, but that her message meant more than she could ever know. I didn't hear back for a while. Didn't expect to. Sometimes apologies don't open doors. They close circles. And that's what this was, a quiet, delicate loop, finally sealed off. But a week later, she replied again. She told me she'd written something. Not public. Just a journal. She said it was about growing up in his orbit, how it felt to be proud of someone you also feared. How long it took to admit that the version of him she defended was one she invented just to feel safe. I asked her if she'd ever want to come on the podcast. No pressure, I said. She waited 3 days. Then said yes. We didn't advertise her name. We didn't say who she was. The episode went out as episode 17, When the Story is in Your Blood. It was one of the quietest episodes we'd ever recorded, but also one of the most devastating. She spoke in careful tones, like someone placing glass on a table. She talked about watching him charm teachers, dodge blame, twist arguments into knots until everyone else looked hysterical. She talked about hearing him speak about me and about Grace and realizing, only years later, how similar the scripts were. How interchangeable we all were in his narrative. And then near the end, she said something I'll never forget. People think you can't love someone and still say what they did was wrong. But that's not true. I love my brother. And I think he's dangerous. That truth used to split me in half. Now it's the only thing that keeps me whole. We ended the episode with silence. No outro music. No, thanks for listening. Just her voice, followed by a long, echoing pause. That was all it needed. The backlash finally came. Not from her. From him. He posted anonymously, of course. But his fingerprints were all over it. A blog rant about cancel culture, witch hunts, toxic feminism. He didn't name me, but again, he didn't have to. I didn't respond. Neither did his sister. But people knew. This time they really knew. And what surprised me most was how quickly the comment section turned against him. Why are you always the victim? You keep telling different versions of what happened. They keep telling the same one. Dude. Sit down. I didn't cheer. Didn't screenshot it for Layla. I just shut my laptop and made soup. Because the worst thing you can do to someone who feeds on reaction is to offer nothing. Just your peace. Your kitchen. Your breath. Your soup. That night, I sat with Theo on the balcony, knees tucked under a blanket, a single candle flickering between us. I told him, I think I'm done. With the podcast? No. With him. With the part of my brain that still tracks him like a shadow. Theo nodded, like he'd been waiting for me to say it. It's weird, I said. Letting go isn't loud. It's just quiet. Like you don't even realize it happened until you check the place where the pain used to live and it's just gone. He smiled, kissed my hand. And for once I believed it was over. Not the story. Him. You don't notice how heavy something's been until you finally set it down. And one morning I did. I woke up, made coffee, and realized I hadn't thought about him in days. Maybe a week. That was new. That was rare. That was freedom, slow and quiet, like a breeze finally making its way through a sealed room. I didn't celebrate. Didn't mark it in my calendar. I just stood by the window, fingers wrapped around a chipped mug, watching the light move across the countertop, and let the silence be. It was enough. A few months later, the podcast got nominated for an award. Not a huge one. Not televised. But real. Meaningful. Recognized. Theo found out before I did. He burst into the room holding his phone above his head like it was the Olympic torch. You're on the short list. I blinked. For what? He turned the screen toward me. There it was, my name. My face. The words quiet fires printed just beneath. I didn't jump or scream. I just stared at it. Because this wasn't about validation. It was about proof. That I'd taken the worst thing someone ever did to me and made something useful. Not beautiful, not redemptive, not romantic, just useful. Something that could hold someone else's hand while they sat alone in a bathroom stall, trying not to cry over something they hadn't told anyone yet. We went to the ceremony. I wore black. Sharp shoulders, silver earrings, clean lines. Theo kept whispering, you look dangerous. I whispered back, good. We didn't win. But we didn't lose either. When they called another name, I clapped genuinely. And when we left, I felt light. Like I'd already won something much bigger. The right to stand there and be seen, fully, without apology. That was the prize. The sister messaged again after the ceremony. Said she'd watched the live stream. Said she cried during the montage where my voice came in over a still of a notebook and an empty teacup. Thank you for giving me space to speak, she wrote. I told her I should be thanking her. She said, maybe we're both allowed to heal. And that stayed with me. For days. Weeks. Maybe forever. The next season of the podcast focused on repair. Not revenge, not even survival repair. Not just fixing the damage, but understanding what gets rebuilt in the ruins. Friendships. Identities. Families that chose to stay intact, not out of obligation, but through the active decision to do better. We had a guest who had reconnected with her estranged father after years of silence. Another who had moved back in with her mother post-divorce and found an entirely new kind of closeness. We talked about boundaries, not as walls but as blueprints. Designs for love that doesn't hurt anymore. It felt different. Softer. But not weaker. Like we'd all stepped out of the storm, not to forget it, but to build something stronger with what was left. One evening, I got a DM from someone who said she'd found the podcast in the middle of a panic attack in a train station bathroom. She was 19. She'd just left a boy who'd taken her money and made her feel like she was difficult to love. She didn't know what to do next. But after listening to the first 2 episodes, she bought herself dinner, found a hostel, and called her sister. Your voice didn't save me, she wrote. But it made me think I could save myself. That line, it made me think I could save myself, became the tagline on our page. Not just because it was beautiful. Because it was true. I printed it and taped it above my desk. Looked at it every time I forgot why I'd started all this in the first place. The memoir stayed in print longer than anyone expected. Book clubs started picking it up. A local library invited me to do a reading. I sat in a circle of mismatched chairs, under flickering fluorescents, reading aloud to a group of women in their 30s, 50s, 70s. Some nodded. One closed her eyes. Another just stared at her lap and didn't say a word the whole evening until the very end when she walked up to me, touched my elbow, and said, "I got my own back too. Thank you for reminding me." Sometimes the simplest sentences hold the most weight. I got my own back too. It echoed. Then came the email that made me pause. It was from a production company. Bigger than the one that did the original series. They wanted to option the rights to the memoir. Not for a docu-style adaptation. For a full scripted drama. 6 episodes. Streaming platform already interested. Raw, they said. But hopeful. Quietly electric. They wanted to explore the gray areas. To show how someone can slowly lose themselves without a single obvious turning point. How do you boil a frog? One producer said in the meeting. We want to show the water before it boils. I listened. I asked questions. And then I said yes. Not because I needed another version of the story in the world, but because I wanted the right version. The full shape. The soft beginnings and the scorched endings. The long, slow ache of someone reclaiming themselves in a world that only respects explosions. And I wanted to help write it. Of course I did. This story still had fire left. The first time I stepped into the writer's room, I felt like an imposter. Everyone had lanyards. Whiteboards full of scribbles. Laptops open, humming with ideas. And there I was, heart pounding, palms sweating, with a red pen and a notebook I'd owned since university. The same one I used to scribble in after every argument, every apology that came wrapped in blame, every moment I felt myself shrinking to fit inside his moods. The producer smiled and said, "We've got the skeleton. You've got the pulse. Let's build this thing together." So we did. We mapped out the arc. 6 episodes. Each one framed around a choice, some small, some seismic. We didn't start with the breakup or the £5,000 theft or even the revenge. We started with the first dinner. The one where he asked me about my dissertation but didn't really listen. The one where he made me laugh so hard I forgot to finish my drink. The one that set the hook. Because that's how it really begins. Not with damage. But with desire. Not with pain. With charm. Writing a character based on yourself is strange. You want to protect her. You want to justify her worst decisions. But the room didn't let me. They pushed me in the right ways. Why did she stay? Why didn't she tell anyone? What did she think she was saving? At first, I got defensive. Then I remembered those were my questions too. Back then in the thick of it. It wasn't about weakness. It was about hope. The stupid, stubborn kind. The kind that keeps you up at night rehearsing conversations where everything turns out okay. The kind that convinces you maybe it is your fault because that means you can fix it. We wrote that into the show. Not with big speeches. With moments. Her pausing outside the door practicing her smile. Her rereading his old text just to remember what nice used to sound like. Her checking the joint bank account 3 times in one day, not to spend, just to see it still there. And then watching it vanish. £5,000. Gone. The team asked if we should change the amount for dramatic impact. I said no. Let it be real. Let people know that betrayal doesn't need to be cinematic to destroy you. Sometimes it costs £5,000 and a year of your life. And sometimes it only costs £8.50 to set the world back in motion. Casting was surreal. I watched dozens of women read for the lead role. Some looked like me. Some didn't. I didn't care. I just wanted someone who understood that quiet unraveling, the way you keep smiling long after something inside you has started to rot. We found her. She was subtle. Sharp. Soft when it hurt most. She read the scene where she makes the debt payments, my scene, and when she finished, the room went still. A kind of stunned quiet. The director looked at me and said, "Is that how it felt?" I nodded. And whispered, "Exactly." Filming started in February. Cold days. Sharp wind. Everything gray and grainy, just like it had been in real life. I visited set twice. The first time I watched them film a scene of the character packing a bag while he sat on the couch, oblivious. He was playing Xbox. She was folding underwear with shaking hands. It wasn't scripted that way. The actress had added the tremble. When the director called cut, I walked outside and cried behind a parked van. Not because I was sad. because I finally understood what I'd survived and how close I'd come to disappearing inside someone else's comfort. The show premiered in October. 6 episodes dropped all at once. I tried not to check reactions. Failed, obviously. But what surprised me wasn't the attention. It was the emails. Thousands of them. Not from fans. From survivors. People who hadn't known how to describe what happened to them. People who had been told he didn't hit you so it's not abuse. People who had made their own £8.50 decisions. Even if theirs looked like moving cities, changing names, leaving quietly at 3 a.m. with just a toothbrush and a single suitcase. They saw themselves. And they wrote to me like they were reporting sightings of long-lost versions of themselves. One woman said, for the first time, I stopped blaming myself. And I started planning my exit. I printed that out. Taped it next to the other quote over my desk. Because those 2 lines together? That was the whole point. A month after the show premiered, I walked into a bookstore and saw it, my face on a stand marked as seen on TV. There was a weird kind of whiplash in that. For so long this had been just mine. A secret grief. A private war. Now it had a spine, a barcode, a streaming deal. And people were discussing it. Like it was theory. Like it was fiction. I don't know why, but I stood there frozen in that aisle longer than I cared to admit. Watching people pick it up, flip through it, weigh it in their hands like they were deciding how heavy someone else's survival story should be. That's when one of the staff members approached me. Young. Probably mid-20s. Nervous energy. Hey, she said, a bit breathless. Sorry, but is this you? She tapped the book cover. I nodded. And for a second I braced myself. For the praise. For the awkward overreach. For a question I wasn't ready to answer. But instead she just said thank you. That story saved my flatmate. And walked away. No explanation. No details. Just dropped that truth like a stone into water and left me to watch the ripples. Sometimes when things start going well you wait for the crash. Not because you're pessimistic. Because for so long survival was the rhythm. And when life starts to resemble calm, your brain gets itchy. Like maybe this is a test. Or a trap. But the crash didn't come. What came instead was stillness. No messages from him. No more cryptic blogs or forum digs or subtweets from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Just space. I think, deep down, even he finally understood. The story no longer belonged to him. That December I got a letter. Handwritten. Blue ink. Folded with care. No name on the front, just to the author. Inside was a short note. Slanted handwriting. Slightly shaky. It read, I am 74 years old. I never left my husband. I always thought it wasn't bad enough to leave. Watching your show made me realize I didn't imagine any of it. I have 2 granddaughters now. I will tell them everything. I will tell them your story. Thank you for making mine visible too. There was no return address. I didn't need one. I placed it in a drawer with the others. The drawer I keep just for reminders of why I did this in the first place. I was asked to speak at a university. Not mine. A new one. Different city. Different buildings. Same brittle student housing smell in the air. They'd assigned the memoir to a literature and psychology class. I walked in expecting 20 students. Found over 100. Some sitting on the floor. One girl had printed out her favorite quote and pasted it into her notebook cover. Sometimes survival looks like betrayal to the wrong people. I stood at the front. And instead of reading a passage, I told them what hadn't made it into the show, or the book, or even the podcast. How sometimes in the middle of the night, I'd go back and reread his messages just to check if I misunderstood him. How I'd listen to voicemails on loop to make sure the tone wasn't as cruel as I'd remembered. How much of my healing was just learning to trust my own memory again. I watched them nod. Not in unison. Quietly. Individually. Little slow nods like they were acknowledging something inside themselves, not me. That was the most beautiful part. This was never just about me. It was about the invisible map we've all been forced to redraw. The one that shows where the danger really lives. And how to get out of it. Layla came with me on the train ride back. We split a giant pack of crisps and shared earbuds. She leaned her head on my shoulder, half asleep, and said, You know you've changed things, right? I didn't answer. Because the truth is, I wasn't sure I had. I hadn't fixed the systems. Hadn't rewritten the laws. Hadn't stopped people like him from finding new ways to twist their guilt into weapons. But I'd lit a torch. I'd walked into a dark room and said, Here. Look. You're not alone. And that's something. The last time I saw him, he didn't see me. It was by accident. A narrow street off the main high road. I was early for a meeting, ducking into a tiny coffee place for something hot and forgettable. He walked past the front window, shoulders hunched, pacing slowly, head tilted down like the sky was too bright for him. There was nothing dramatic about it. No confrontation. No cinematic eye contact. Just him, smaller than I remembered. Not physically, but in presence. In gravity. Like a signal that didn't reach as far anymore. I didn't move. Didn't flinch. Just watched the echo of a life I'd already outlived. And for the first time I didn't feel afraid. Didn't feel angry either. I just felt done. The kind of done that doesn't come from revenge or closure or apology. The kind of done that feels like peace. He turned the corner and disappeared. And I turned back to the counter and asked for an oat flat white like I hadn't just seen a ghost dissolve into daylight. That night, I journaled. It had been a while. Not because I'd stopped needing it. Just because life had been too full. But this entry poured out of me in a way that felt final. He didn't ruin me. He rerouted me. And that path led somewhere better. I closed the book and slept harder than I had in weeks. The second season of the show was greenlit. This time, the story wouldn't be mine. We were going broader. Different characters. Fictional arcs. Inspired by real letters from the audience, fragments of rage and rebuilding, and everything in between. I'd still write. Still oversee. But I wouldn't be the center anymore. That felt right. Like handing the mic to someone else who needed it more. The working title? Aftermath. We wanted to show what happens not just after the explosion, but after the silence that comes after it. The slow crawl back to self. The rebuilding of routine. The strange grief of losing a version of yourself you wanted to believe in, even if she was never truly whole. One episode was inspired by a man who wrote in to say he left his partner after realizing she never once asked him how he was feeling, only what he'd done for her lately. Another came from a teenage girl who said watching the show gave her the language to describe her sister's ex. I didn't know you could love someone and still be in danger, she wrote. We brought those stories to life. And for each one, I sat with the writers, whispering, make it gentle. Make it sharp. Make it real. By the end of the year, the podcast had over 1 million downloads. 1 million. I tried not to think about the number. Tried to remember it as single listeners. One woman walking her dog. One man doing dishes. One student hiding in a library cubicle, earbuds in, clutching a pencil like a lifeline. It mattered. Not because of the scale, but because of the reach. We were throwing rope ladders into dark places. And people were climbing out. There's one moment I come back to though. Always. When I haven't told anyone. Not even Theo. It was a night months ago. Before the show. Before the awards. Before the piece. I was alone. I'd had a hard day, nothing specific, just the weight of being a person who survived something ugly and is now expected to turn it into content. I was brushing my teeth. Looked up. Caught my reflection. And for half a second I saw her, the girl who used to tiptoe around a one-bedroom flat, afraid of waking someone who didn't even like her anymore. She blinked. I blinked back. And just like that she was gone. But I stood there for a full minute, foam in my mouth, eyes wide, breath shallow. And then I whispered, just to myself, just once. I see you. I think maybe that's all she ever wanted. To be seen. To be heard. To be believed. A few weeks later, I hosted a live event for the podcast. First time ever. Real people. Real room. Soft lighting. Rows of chairs. The final guest was a woman named Erin. Late 30s. Laugh that could undo a room. She told the story of how she left a man who never laid a hand on her but punished her in 1,000 invisible ways. She said he never shouted, but he always made sure I felt 1 inch too big for the room. I asked her what made her leave. She smiled. I watched a show. A girl made £8.50 worth of payments. And I realized I could do the same. The audience went quiet. Not out of politeness. Out of recognition. That beautiful, breathless stillness when something cuts so close to the skin you forget you're in public. We didn't need a standing ovation. We needed that silence. It said everything. I used to think the end of a story had to be loud. Some final gesture. Some speech. Some email sent at 2 a.m. with every thought you'd never dared say when it still might have changed things. But this ending wasn't like that. It was quiet. Ordinary. A Tuesday. I woke up. Made tea. Let the kettle whistle longer than usual. Sat on the edge of the bed in one of Theo's oversized shirts and stared at the slice of light cutting through the blinds. And I thought, this is it. Not the fight. Not the fallout. Just this. A life. My own. Later that afternoon, I got a letter in the mail. Not from a stranger this time. Not typed. Handwritten. But familiar. I knew the slant before I even opened it. It was from his mother. I hesitated. Held the envelope like it might burn. Then opened it. The note was short. No apology. No explanation. Just a few lines. I know you probably don't want to hear from me. That's fair. But I wanted to say I believe you. I didn't at first. I couldn't. But I do now. And I'm sorry. For all of it. That was it. No return address. No signature. Just that one quiet sentence. I believe you. It took longer than it should have, but I realized this wasn't for me to respond to. It was hers. Her step forward. Her unfinished loop. And I let it stay that way. I placed it next to the one from the 74-year-old woman. And the student. And the sister. A drawer full of fragments. Each one proof that a story doesn't end when you stop telling it, it ends when it starts living in someone else. A few months later, I took a solo trip. No purpose. No work. No panels or speaking gigs or book readings. Just a train to the coast and a room with peeling paint and a view of the water. I brought no laptop. No agenda. Only a battered notebook and an old hoodie that still smelled like lavender. On the third day, I walked along the beach. Sea glass. Driftwood. A dog barking in the wind somewhere behind me. And I did something I hadn't done in years. I wrote something just for me. Not for the show. Not for the feed. Not for a sponsor or a publication or a thread that might go viral. Just me. I wrote. I thought revenge would fix me. It didn't. But telling the truth did. And maybe that's the only real power we ever have, the guts to name what hurt us and the grace to grow past it anyway. And as I finished the sentence, I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because I realized this wasn't a victory lap. This was a beginning. Not a return to innocence, but a new kind of strength. One that doesn't need to be loud, or perfect, or proved. Just chosen. Every day. By me. Now I live small and loud and soft and full. I take up space the way I used to apologize for. I leave dishes in the sink sometimes and don't call it failure. I answer the phone when I want to and not when I don't. I text Layla long messages in the middle of the night, just to say I love her. I look at Theo across the table and let myself believe he's real. I say no more easily now. And yes, with my whole chest. And some days, when I walk past people holding hands or arguing quietly over which train to take or pushing prams down cracked pavements, I wonder how many of them are surviving something silent. How many are trying not to be erased by someone who calls it love? How many are halfway through writing their own story of getting free? And I wish I could say to all of them, I see you. You're not alone. You're not imagining it. And when the time comes when you're ready to choose yourself again, I hope you remember this. It only cost me £8.50 to break the cycle. It cost me everything else to believe I deserved to. But I did. And so do you.